All right, hello everyone. We're excited to get started with today's webinar, Enterprise eCommerce SEO, What It Takes to Scale Success. My name is Emma Still, and I am the Partner Marketing Manager here at EliteSEM, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'll introduce you to our presenters very shortly, but first we're going to start with a few housekeeping notes. The webinar platform we're using is called Zoom. You can join audio via your computer, tablet, or phone, or you can call in directly from your phone. If you have any questions during the webinar, type them into the Q&A box at any time in your Zoom panel. We'll be having a Q&A section at the end of the presentation where the presenters will be answering any questions that you have. Lastly, this webinar is going to be recorded, and we'll be sending you the recording and slides for you to reference or share with colleagues later this week. So let's get started. Today's webinar will cover enterprise e-commerce SEO and the strategies you need in order to scale success. Our first speaker is Joe Duress. Joe is an SEO team lead at EliteSEM. He brings over a decade of agency experience with a focus on technical optimization, site migrations, and content strategies. Always looking for ways to improve himself, Joe has built several of his own websites, which he has treated as his own virtual sandbox for testing SEO strategies. And we'll progress the slide forward to our speaker slide, please. We're also delighted to have Josue Ledesma joining us from our partner, Trustpilot. Josue is the Global Content Marketing Manager for Trustpilot. Having been in the industry for nearly 7 years, he's responsible for ensuring the content reaching Trustpilot's audience is relevant, engaging, educational, and actionable. And I'll also share a little bit about each of our companies before we get started. EliteSEM is an award-winning digital marketing agency. Founded on search, focused on holistic, performance-driven digital marketing, Elite expertise spans paid search, SEO, shopping and feed, display advertising, paid social, email marketing, and conversion rate optimization. Boasting unprecedented 97% employee and 94% client retention rates, our commitment to people and performance has cemented our position as one of the top digital marketing agencies in North America. Trustpilot is the leading review management platform, helping companies automate the review collection process, build their reputation, and improve their marketing and sales. Over 200,000 companies collect reviews with Trustpilot, and Trustpilot.com has collected nearly 50 million company reviews already. So, to kick things off, you all filled out a survey upon registration, and one of the questions was, what's one of the biggest challenges you have when it comes to crafting or implementing a large-scale SEO strategy? So we put together a word cloud of some of the most common challenges that you're all experiencing. And if we progress to the next slide, we can see that strategy is one big challenge, knowing the right place to start, getting new traffic. A lot of you struggle with time, rankings with Google, and changes that are happening to the algorithm, and especially content scaling across massive e-commerce enterprise websites. So I'm happy to let you know a lot of these topics are going to be covered by our awesome speakers today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joe, and we're going to actually administer one quick poll. So level setting, just to get a feel for who's in the audience and how things are going with your SEO performance. Give us a feel for how satisfied you are with your performance of existing SEO efforts. We'll give everyone about 30 seconds or so to get their results in before we publish them for everyone to see. And just a couple more seconds. All right, and we'll publish the results. Awesome. So a little bit more, close to half of you are not satisfied with what's happening with your SEO, and about 30% of you not even doing SEO right now. So hopefully a lot of the strategies that Joe and Josue are going to cover today will give you some great ideas to get jump started and help improve performance. So with all of that being said, I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker, Joe Duress. And Joe, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Emma. First and foremost, wanted to thank everybody for joining. Josue and myself are very excited to share some of the challenges and more importantly, the solutions that we have to share with you folks today. So as far as the agenda goes, we're going to kick off just kind of clarifying what we mean by enterprise versus small websites. Also, the advantages and disadvantages of large websites. How to adopt small-scale advantages for big success for enterprise websites. And then we'll go through a little more detail on common pitfalls in regards to SEO and what it takes to really scale success for your large-scale website. And then we'll close things out with a couple case studies, and then we'll hopefully leave about 10-15 minutes for some questions. So judging by the poll results, looks like almost three-fourths of the folks here today either are not happy with their SEO results or not engaging in SEO. So clearly, you know, there's benefit here for organic search as a whole. So why is SEO important? According to Search Engine Journal, 93% of all traffic comes from a search engine. So it's imperative to not only have a presence in organic search, but to control how major search engines such as Google access and rank your content. So what's the difference? How do we qualify enterprise? What exactly are we going to be going through here today in today's presentation? So we're talking about websites that have 100,000 pages or more. Some websites even commonly have millions of pages. So there are some unique challenges to the sheer size of these types of websites. First, small startup, maybe just, you know, a couple hundred pages total. Different challenges, but there's some overlapping approaches to SEO as well. So a perfect example here is looking at HomeDepot.com. This might be on the more extreme end, but they have almost 4 million pages indexing Google currently today. So actually, we're going to be using Home Depot as an example for a couple of the challenges and solutions that we'll talk through today.
So we're going to run through our next poll just to get a feel for size of the website for folks who are in the audience today. So the question is, how many pages are on your website? Less than 500, up to 5,000, between 5,000 and 50,000, 50 to 100, or more than 100,000. So we'll give you guys about 30 seconds or so, get those poll results in. That way, Joe and Josue will be able to speak to everyone who's in the audience today. All right, still coming in. We'll give a few more seconds. All right, so let's publish those results. Awesome. So we've got about 40% of the audience at less than 500, majority of the audience kind of falling in that middle ground, and about 7% with websites over 100,000 pages. So Joe, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Now, the good news is even if, you know, you're not in that percentile where you've got more than 100,000 pages, like I said, some of the strategies and solutions we're presenting today are still going to be applicable to you and your business. So here are some big brands that we wanted to call out. I think we have some folks attending today. So hopefully we can provide some great information for you folks. So let's kick things off with, what are the advantages of having a large-scale enterprise website? So first and foremost, the sheer amount of and variety of content that you have on a large e-com website often leads to a variety of incoming links. So from bloggers, maybe writing customer stories about using your products, maybe news outlets promoting company announcements, press releases, or even social media users sharing purchases and promotions on their social profiles. All of which of this really helps give your brand exposure online. Backlinks are a really great way to improve your keyword rankings in Google, and large websites typically have a more natural spread of links coming to their website. They also tend to have resources available, time and staff to tackle high priorities. So whether that be an upcoming large collection of products being launched to the website, or maybe you feel like you need to migrate your website to another platform, maybe even just update the platform you're on. These types of things really are kind of the benefits of having that large scale website versus smaller websites. And to that point, financial resources as well. I'm sure everyone here today is already thinking about or starting to think about how they're going to get their budget approved for reaching and achieving their goals in 2019. So large authoritative brands such as some of you folks here have more wiggle room when it comes to invest financial resources into your website than smaller startups typically do. And I'll pass it to Josue to answer a couple other things here for you.
Hey guys, this is Josue here. Thanks for taking the bulk of that, Joe. Really, some of the advantages that these bigger websites have is around domain authority, brand trustworthiness, and brand credibility. And I know that these topics might be a little more obscure and a little harder to quantify. And what's really interesting, given the poll results that we've seen, it seems like a lot of the listeners here actually have smaller websites. And I'm actually more excited about that because a lot of what we're going to show you here is really kind of setting you up for success. So as your website grows and as your company grows, you can be sure that you've kind of already invested in things like domain authority, brand trustworthiness, and brand credibility. And while we'll go into a little bit of detail later on, what that really means is that Google essentially favors a brand that is already well known or already successful in kind of their eyes. So one of the examples I can give is a bounce rate. So if you're a brand or a website that doesn't have domain authority, doesn't have that trustworthiness or that credibility, and you show up on a search results, but people are bouncing from your site as soon as they jump on, Google's going to say, hey, that website or that page or that result is not really credible. We're going to start pushing them down. And the websites that do have that credibility, they start getting moved up on results. So really, it's the ones that have already found success in search results kind of see that success snowball a little bit. And smaller companies definitely have some advantages to that.
That's right, Josue. So let's actually get into some of the disadvantages of large websites. So starting off with, with hundreds of thousands to millions of pages on enterprise websites, it's difficult to have a niche focus. So, you're the Jack or Jill of all trades, so to speak. So chances are you have maybe tons of different types of products. And you might even have a blog where you're trying to expand the amount of content or topical focus by trying to talk more about lifestyle, make the blog post a little more personable, and maybe expand outside of what your product pages really speak to gather more audience to the website. So all of these things can really reduce your chances of being the go-to outlet for a given topic or type of product the more that you have on your website. Something else is, and I'm sure, again, most of you are familiar with this, some struggles with large scale e-com websites is there could be a lot of red tape and approvals involved to get things moving, get implementations on your website, get content created. And this can actually extend the time it takes to get things done and to see results. So this is especially true when it comes to creating content, like I said, or maybe even more so on the development side. I think we have some developers in the audience today. So I'm sure you're very familiar with, maybe monthly or quarterly sprints and maybe long-lasting code freezes, especially during the holidays. And something else, large brands are kind of less likely to take a risk on new SEO strategies. So if there's a strategy that comes out, let's say, recently, a couple of years ago, Google first announced their accelerated mobile pages, or AMP. So this was really, it was unknown at first whether or not this would drive more traffic or revenue to websites. So there was quite a delay, at least from my experience at EliteSEM. There was a little bit of a struggle to try to convince the larger brands that this was worth the investment and worth kind of getting ahead of the curve on. There weren't that many case studies available to provide ROI on these types of investments in making those changes. So, overall, this can really hinder your team's ability to be creative with their marketing efforts overall. And like I said, the more content you have on your website, the more diluted that focus gets. And there's also some value in getting a lot of content on your site. So being agile is kind of a challenge when it comes to the e-com side, large e-com side of things.
Yeah, and that I think that goes right into the next point, which is not having that freedom to test or experiment. I think it's easy to get intimidated or to be a little daunted when you're such a big website to think, and any moves that I make in the SEO space need to be so massive because my website is massive. But that's really not the case. It's definitely easier if you have a smaller website or if you have a smaller kind of like web footprint, but even big companies or big websites, there is some freedom and there's some potential to test different subsets of your site, which will allow you to kind of learn from some of these other SEO strategies or SEO opportunities that then can really affect the website as a whole. Another struggle is having a complicated site structure. Now, Joe will go through some of the technicals about that, but there are really two ways why that's a problem. One is that if your sitemap and navigation and your URLs are kind of all over the place and pointing in a bunch of different ways, Google kind of will get confused in terms of trying to serve its users, or when it's trying to serve its users with the best results. If your website isn't really communicating to Google in the right way, and we'll get into that a little bit later, then you're probably not going to do as well when it comes to SEO. But also on the UI side, on the user interface side, if somebody is going to your website and is not really finding your navigation or finding the user experience as easy as possible, then kind of going back to what I was talking about before, they might just bounce out of the page and start hurting you from that perspective, and then your SEO results will falter as well. And then lastly, the perception of an inauthentic voice, which is, again, a little bit on the less quantifiable side. And I'm speaking from my perspective as a content marketing manager. I think it really matters what your aim is when you're trying to really target some of these SEO keywords and some of these SEO strategies. I think it becomes really transparent when a company kind of just targeted a keyword and threw a bunch of resources at it and threw a bunch of words and images on a single page, just trying to get on that page one of a results page. That might work for a little bit, but once your users start coming on and start saying like, oh, you're actually not here to solve my problem, you're actually not providing any real information, they're going to bounce out. Google's going to know, okay, you're not actually a reliable web page, and again, your results are going to suffer.
So Josue, you alluded to this earlier. So you want to go through some advantages for how to adopt the small scale approach for bigger success?
Yeah, so really the way we approach this webinar is saying like, what are some strategies that these companies and websites can take away as they grow? And I think it's really important to learn from some of these smaller sites that have really owned their space from an SEO perspective. So I just wanted to go over a couple of different principles and key points. So always be updating your SEO strategy. I think SEO is kind of definitely on the acceleration path. It seems to be moving faster and faster and faster every year and every quarter. So I think it behooves any company that is interested in SEO or even has that on their radar to really know what the latest updates are. Joe, you mentioned AMP earlier. We're also seeing things in voice that are really mattering. New technologies in results sites as it comes to the knowledge graph. So the more you know about what Google is doing in terms of serving its users on google.com, I think the more you can react and respond. So with that goes testing. Test different strategies on different site pages. Again, we don't want you to feel intimidated by thinking that testing an SEO strategy means you have to test your entire website for SEO. It can be like your product pages, or it can just be your landing pages, or maybe it's just your blog. Really make sure that you're taking advantage of the research that you should be doing if you're not already, in terms of search engine updates, and then see what you can do to kind of make those incremental advantages that will then set you up for success. Because I think, Joe, let me know if you feel otherwise, but SEO is definitely a long-term approach. You can take some actions that lead to short-term success, but it's really, I think, the long-term approach that leads to the best success. The other thing I wanted to talk about is thinking about your actual search engine results page, your SERP. Everybody's fighting for that number one space, for that number one rank, and it's really hard to maintain it. And if you do get there, you're kind of king of the hill, and everybody's trying to knock you off. So try to think of other ways that you may be able to highlight your results on a SERP page. So something that we do at Trustpilot is we allow companies to display reviews on their website. And I'm going to a little bit of detail later on, but essentially that does lead to SEO benefits, because it allows your search results to have these rich snippet stars, which are these little yellow stars that show up on search results. And those have made a really dramatic difference for our clients when it comes to their search traffic. So even though they may be the third, fourth, or fifth result on the page, if they're the only ones with those stars, they're going to see a way, way better performance than if they didn't have those stars, or even compared to number one, if that number one result doesn't have the stars. And then lastly, just to get a little more specific about what kind of things companies and websites should really be thinking of when it comes to SEO, is local, voice, mobile, and answer. Answer is a new one. So local, essentially Google is kind of always serving up local results, some more obvious than not, but they definitely take into account your location and your location history when they're serving up results. So there should be some kind of search engine optimization that pertains to local results that you should be aware of. Voice is huge. Everybody's using Alexa, everybody's using Siri or Google Now. If you're not thinking about voice, you definitely should be. Think about how a potential customer may be asking a question that can lead to your product, or are you solving a problem or solving a solution that can be answered in a long tail question. That might be something that you might be thinking about when it comes to voice. Mobile, I think a lot of people already know about it. Joe alluded to it earlier. I think if you're not on the mobile bandwagon, it's definitely too late. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything about it. So if you haven't already, definitely think about optimizing for mobile. And then answer, really what that means is that Google is moving into a space where they're trying to really serve up an answer rather than a set of results. You know, talking about voice earlier, you can definitely tell that they're trying to have that answer be whatever the voice assistant says, but also you can see that in the knowledge graph. If you type in a query on google.com and then there's like an excerpt of a result in a little box, that's an answer. That's something that you can get on. And I definitely think it's worth investing some time and resources to think, how can we be in that box? Because that's such a prominent space that can be really, really powerful for anyone trying to really succeed in SEO.
Yeah, this is all great stuff, Josue. I think the mobile piece especially, if you're not already looking at your mobile rankings versus desktop rankings, definitely start that as soon as possible. We've been doing that for all of our SEO clients here at EliteSEM, really trying to make sure we have a baseline to make sure that, something that's coming up actually for Google. They've been talking about mobile for years, but up to this point, Google has actually crawled websites from the desktop point of view. And now Google is changing that so that they crawl the web from a mobile browser point of view. So they're calling this the mobile first index. I'm sure some of you have heard of this. Google expects to have most, if not all, websites in their search results migrated to their mobile first index by July of this year. So like Josue said, it might be a little too late, but if you've got the resources and you've been thinking about it, one thing you could do very easily is start tracking those mobile keyword rankings, get that baseline, and then when the switch happens, you'll get a notification within your Google Search Console account that you've been migrated to mobile first index, and you can kind of have a baseline of when your rankings started to shift, hopefully for the better, with that change in Google.
Cool. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is optimizing for understanding and credibility. Those are really kind of two key principles that I think are easy to remember ways or easy to remember concepts that websites and companies can use to think about how do we approach SEO. So understanding really means, does Google understand what your company does, what they offer, and who you are essentially? And this can be very technical. So the first thing that I wrote here is leverage semantic HTML5 and schema, or schema markup, if you will. If you don't know, if you want to learn more about schema markup, you can just go to schema.org. But essentially what this does is these are very templatized and specific ways of setting up your website and setting up some of the information on your website so that Google knows exactly what it is. And this can be as basic as like company name, location, products, things like that. And this is where we were saying that e-commerce companies actually have a disadvantage of, because as their website grows, all of this information might start to get muddled, and then Google may see that company name is different on one of a company's websites, and maybe it's something else on another company's website, and it just starts to get a little bit muddled and messy. But by really leveraging some of these key elements now, as your website grows, it's kind of already done for you. And that also brings me to my second point, which is creating page templates and bucketing site pages. Again, your page templates is really just a way to make sure that you're communicating to Google in the right way, and also setting you up for a way to scale your company and your website as it grows. Bucketing site pages, again, like I mentioned, your product pages, all your landing pages, things like your blog sites, all of these things should be bucketed in a way that is very consistent, and allows Google to really know what it is, what the aim of your website is. So the aim of your website, if your product page, is very different than if you're on a blog page. So those are the kinds of things that you should be considering. On the credibility side, that goes back to like links, third-party channels, mentions. Site linking is a major SEO strategy, but I think it goes even further than that. And this is just part of building your brand and your domain authority, where just the fact that you're being mentioned somewhere, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be on a link, is important to Google. So again, social media sites, this is why it's important to have an active social media channel and an active social media following, because if you're getting those mentions, then in Google's eyes, your brand and your domain is kind of being elevated. That's why we offer reviews as a solution. At Trustpilot, we have, over, I think, 20 million visitors at this point a month, just going to trustpilot.com. And we've established ourselves as a brand and as a domain in terms of authority. So the fact that we're linking to these other companies through our reviews, or that our reviews, which are high quality pieces of content, are talking about these companies, these kind of just have these peripheral benefits that elevate a company's own brand authority. And then lastly, I kind of already talked about this a little bit, but really developing content patterns and style consistencies. This can be more specifically applicable to kind of like blog or content marketing, specifically for SEO. If you're really consistent about, keeping your H1s the same kind of subheaders, making sure all of your images have image descriptions and alt text, all of these things, by staying consistent there, again, you're really making sure that Google knows exactly what your website is doing and what your page is trying to do. And that is going to make a difference in your SEO.
Yeah, Josue, I'd like to echo your mention of utilizing page templates. This can really be a huge win for large e-com developers. So basically, as you can make one change to a single page template, let's say it's your product page, that can carry over to hundreds of thousands of products on your website. So an example might be on a product page, maybe you expand the amount of romance copy or product description content within your product page templates. That allows every single product that uses that template to have more valuable content, and couple that with an appropriate keyword strategy and optimizing the content correctly so that you're targeting the right keywords can really have a huge impact on your SEO. So I think that's one of those things, very kind of big takeaway is you definitely utilize the templated approach to optimizing and updating your website.
All right, great guys. So we're going to pop in with one more poll as we're moving into the final section of the webinar about some of the common pitfalls for enterprise e-commerce SEO and some of the common struggles that you're having. So just to get a feel from the audience, what are some of the biggest things that you're struggling with when it comes to SEO and scaling success? We've got about 15 or so minutes for this final section before we move into the Q&A. So we'll try and highlight the ones that most of you are struggling with and emphasize those as best as possible while with the time left that we do have. So we'll give everyone a few more seconds to get those results in before we publish. Creating content, fixing technical issues, managing customer reviews and comments, limitations with your platform, measuring performance. I've already seen a few Q&A questions come in about measuring performance. Simply just not enough time in the day, or knowing the best strategy to focus on. So one more second, get those final results in, and we'll go ahead and publish. And wow, it looks like 66%, a lot of you are looking for the best strategy to implement or focus on. A big one is content, measuring performance, having enough time in the day. This is really interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of these things that we're going to be covering in this next section over the next 10 or 15 minutes before we get into Q&A. So from here, I'll let you guys take it away. Joe?
All right. So good stuff. I think we're going to be able to help a lot of you folks here with those. I'm not sure I can get you more time in the day, but how about I help you understand how to better use your time in a day, better use your resources. So we're going to get a little bit technical here. I did see that we had some developers in the audience. So for those who are not developers or more tech savvy, I'll also kind of speak to more high level and definitely encourage you to pass this along to your development team and make sure that they're keeping all these things in mind here. So first and foremost, the kind of dreaded duplicate content. So just to explain what that means, essentially in Google's eyes and just other major search engines, duplicate content can cause confusion in Google's rankings. So, let's say you have two pages that are exactly the same, different URLs, same product, let's say. Google doesn't know which version of that page to give authority to. So you essentially spread out and dilute your SEO focus rather than consolidate it to one highly authoritative page. So why does this happen? One of the first, as far as e-commerce, and here's an example from Home Depot, they've got their faceted navigation here. So faceted navigation, which really comes from the ability to filter or sort products, often creates multiple instances of the same content that's just really organized or laid out differently. So for example, here, if someone were to click on the brand Samsung and try to get to a refrigerator, but they also go back and they say, you know what, let me actually try to browse by color instead. So we basically have two separate URLs, two separate paths leading to the same exact content, but we have two URLs that are presenting the exact same product, the same refrigerator. So that's how this type of faceted navigation or the filtering can really cause some issues for duplicate content. Dynamic URLs can also occur on large-scale e-com websites, as they usually have many browse paths, like I said, to get to the same product. So again, another example of duplicate content. You have multiple ways to get to one product, and it spreads that out. And in Google's eyes, all it takes is to see that even one character difference in a URL, to them, it's a unique URL. So if you've got a bunch of backlinks going to a product page, but you've got multiple URL versions of that product page, and you're not taking the necessary steps to consolidate that value, you're essentially spreading your backlinks across multiple pages instead of having them all direct to one single product page. Another common cause of duplicate content is discrepancies between pages using both HTTP and HTTPS to render its content. So this has become more of a recent issue since Google has started giving sites a slight ranking boost in their results to sites that use HTTPS across the board. So for e-commerce websites, you're most familiar with using this in the past on your checkout page or your cart page. Now Google, over the past couple of years, they've been encouraging webmasters to put their entire website on HTTPS to make it more secure. So sometimes developers will implement HTTPS on all pages of their site, but they won't implement a site-wide redirect to consolidate that. And basically, you've got a duplication of your entire website, and that's very common with these enterprise e-commerce websites. And lastly here, product variations, such as color, size, material, you're all familiar with this, can also create dupe content if it's not handled correctly. So for example, let's say someone is shopping on your website for a t-shirt. Each time they choose a different size, small, medium, large, it creates a different URL. The small size has its own URL, medium has its own URL, so on and so forth. But the content's the same. Nothing else changes other than the fact that the user, the shopper, is trying to find what size works for them. So this, again, essentially creates that those multiple URL variations of the same exact content. So do not compete against yourself. You want to really consolidate your SEO equity into a single page when you come across these types of scenarios. And more specifically, how to fix these, some SEO tags. So to get a little more technical here, there's a tag called a canonical tag you can put in your source code. Basically, it tells Google, hey, look, we know that this product page has multiple URL versions, but this tag is telling Google, hey, this is the one that we want you to outrank all the other variations and avoid what we call URL confusion in the search results. You could also apply a no index or no follow tag. Again, something you add to the source code of the page, the back end of any web page. And that kind of tells Google, we know that this shouldn't, this is duplicate content. Do not index this. We aren't trying to game the system by having multiple pages for the exact same content. And some indexation files. So one thing you could do is use your robots.txt file, which is just it's a simple text file you upload to your website, and it tells Google what content to index and what content not to index. So you can use this to your advantage to tell Google, hey, all these URLs that use these, this structure or maybe these URL parameters, don't add these to the index. Do not crawl these. We don't want to have some index bloat and essentially have duplicate versions of all of our content. So here's an example of ethanallen.com. They have a site-wide redirect in place from HTTP to HTTPS. A 301 redirect is the permanent version of that, something else worth noting. And that, again, this tells Google that if anybody ever accesses the HTTP version, that they should be directed to the HTTPS, the more secure version. And more importantly, it tells Google that, hey, we know we have multiple versions, but we want them all to direct and have all the SEO value go to one version of that page.
And just before you move on, Joe, I think I wanted to highlight two quick things about this HTTP and HTTPS advice that you're giving. One, I think this is this change by Google, or this favoring by Google, is a pattern that shows that Google is increasingly thinking about the end user. We're talking about UI and UX before, and this is now starting to consider the security of the end user. And I think that's a trend that we should really be focusing on. And then lastly, I think there's a second non-SEO benefit to this, is that common web browsers, both Chrome and Firefox, are actually starting to show kind of security warnings for any websites that load on HTTP instead of HTTPS. So I think if you're not already redirecting, or if you're not already using an HTTPS version of your site, you might start seeing some dip or negative traffic trends because of that.
That's a really good point. All right, the next suggestion on how to scale success here is to optimize your crawl budget. So basically, what is crawl budget? It's the amount of content Google can find per crawl session when crawling your website before it reaches its limit. So large e-com websites with over 100,000 pages are commonly victims to crawl budget issues for the reasons that they just have so much content available. So some reasons, why does this happen typically for large-scale e-com websites? There's some legacy page errors are common on these types of websites due to products going out of stock and presenting a 404 error. So you can see an example of this in the screenshot here, where we've got a website with over 200,000, close to 240,000 not found errors, 404 errors in their Google Search Console account. And this is probably most likely happening because when a product goes out of stock, it has a 404 error and it loses all of that SEO history that was previously there. So this means that Google's crawling pages that don't provide any value to your audience. And speaking about the out of stock products here, at the end of the presentation, EliteSEM actually will be sharing a link for you to download a white paper focused on the best practices for handling your out of stock products. So definitely take a look at that. I think that's super helpful. The next cause here, commonly for larger websites, is chain redirects can occur after years and years of consolidating content or from previous platform migrations. So maybe you did an entire redesign of your website and your URL structure completely changed and you wanted to redirect all the old URLs to the new URLs. Well, if you don't maintain that redirect list and you continue to add more redirects onto that, it could really bog down the crawlers when accessing your website. So it kind of gives Google the long scenic route to get to the destination rather than the optimal kind of shortcut route. And lastly, and most obviously, the fact that large websites can have millions of pages for Google to try to crawl and access can really just hinder how quickly your fresh new products or blog posts can get indexed in Google search results. So overall, try to serve your content to Google in a silver platter. Really just give them your high quality grade A content and try to trim the fat of any other content that really isn't going to provide any value to your users or might cause some overall site health performance issues. So how do we fix these? So proper sitemap usage is one of those things. So in your sitemap files, whether it be your XML sitemap, which is simply just a file that you upload to your website and have Google access that, try not to have 404 errors or redirects. Only include your valuable, useful content in your sitemap files. And if you've got a lot of products or just a lot of content, try to break those up into separate files. No more than 50,000 pages or URLs per sitemap is kind of a good rule of thumb. Also try to use some useful internal linking. Remove links to broken pages on your website. Remove any links that are redirecting and update them so that they direct to the destination, and try to give Google a little bit of a break when you're accessing your content. Maybe use breadcrumb links. So if you ever see the links at the top of a page where it goes from the home page to your category page to your product page, try to use those because this will ensure Google will find your most valuable content, like any new products you've just published, more quickly and efficiently. And lastly here, limit the crawling of any invaluable content. So use your robots text file. We mentioned this earlier. Try to set up disallow directives for any URLs that you don't want indexed. And I have an example of that for you here today later on. But so something you could do is make sure if you have any product filtering URLs or thin content pages, try to disallow those in your robots text and make sure that Google doesn't crawl those and save some of that bandwidth. And lastly, talk to your developers, see if they've got any of these things in place. And Josue, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, not right now. I think I know we're running a little bit out of time, so I say let's move on.
Perfect. So I mentioned this earlier, the robots text file. Here's an example again from Ethan Allen. They are disallowing any parameters that are used to filter products, as these are duplicate content and they're just kind of wasting Google's crawl budget. So moving through to another common way to scale success is to just equally distribute your SEO value or your link equity. And this can really be easily diluted on large scale websites. So why does this happen? Complicated navigation, we talked about this earlier. In this screenshot, you can see Boots.com has way too many links in their navigation. In their defense, they've got over 100,000 products. So we understand it's difficult to categorize everything optimally, but the more links you have in a single page, the less SEO value you get from each link. So think about it this way: when you cut a pizza pie, if you cut it in half, you have 2 large slices, and you've got 2 very happy people. If you cut it into 8 slices, you get much less per slice. That's kind of the way to think about this. If you've got hundreds of links on one page, the value of each of those links is diluted. There's a smaller percentage. Deep content also happens when it takes too many clicks to get to a given page from the top of a path. So let's say you've got an old product that it's not easily surfaced. Maybe the homepage is a place where you can try to add some featured links of those products to get them closer to the top of the browse path. And this happens often with enterprise e-com sites with, again, thousands or millions of products that, there's only so many links you can have on a given page. So choosing wisely where to put that and resurface that deep content. And lastly here, JavaScript links are, unfortunately, they're used very often on large e-commerce websites. So, because it makes it easier to provide links to tons of product pages. So again, your developers probably, if they're using JavaScript to power, to populate links to products, it's because it's definitely more dynamic. Those links are populated dynamically, but properly formatted HTML links can take more manual work, but Google still has a hard time crawling JavaScript links and content. So it really causes that SEO value to be lost. So try not to send your users on a wild goose chase. Try to make it super easy for them to find your content, and then as a result, it'll be easier for search engines to find that as well. So to talk through how to fix this, simplify your navigation, try to create a cleaner information architecture that buckets your products into as few categories as possible, as much as you can, without losing the focus there. And avoid multiple drop-downs as well in your navigation. Utilize linking modules, so add related products links to your product pages, or include featured articles links on your blog posts. We just talked about how having too many links on a page can be detrimental, so try to limit these modules to no more than 7 links total per page. And if you vary that up per product, you could really resurface some of that old content and help really avoid link value being diluted. And lastly, format your text links properly. So avoid using JavaScript to populate your links. Like I said, Google still does have problems accessing these types of links depending on how you're creating them technically. So use properly formatted HTML links, and you'll ensure that Google can find your content and properly spread that SEO equity throughout your entire website. Here's an example of kindsnacks.com. They've got 3 nice well-designed links at the bottom of their products. Have something else in mind here, browse different products. It surfaces some related products on one of the more popular product pages on their website. And lastly here, I know we're getting out of time, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. Remove thin content. So thin content happens often on large e-commerce sites, whether it's on category pages or product descriptions. It takes a lot of copywriting resources to keep up with the amount of content on your site. So some reasons why this happens on larger websites is just, quite frankly, limited copywriting resources. Category pages are probably the biggest victim here on large e-com websites, where copywriting resources really focus on trying to get unique product descriptions over writing unique copy for a category page. So here's an example of shopco.com. This is one of their category pages. It's just all imagery, very little text. And to that point, product descriptions or romance copy tends to be very thin on enterprise e-com sites because, sometimes you might work with merchants or brands that don't provide that product description for you. So it can really be taxing to try to get that content created over hundreds of thousands of products. And as mentioned earlier, category pages don't get much love when it comes to copy content. Design or usability is often favored over unique copy. So therefore, page templates for categories and products tend to be very image heavy, like I said in this screenshot here. So another thing here is just an overall lack of user-generated content. So things like customer reviews can be a great way to build out content on product pages. The problem is lots of big brands don't leverage this due to the customer service aspect or, replying to or addressing poor reviews. It kind of turns people away from adding these types of capabilities to their website. So, and same thing goes for blog comments. We want to make sure, there's a lot of work to approve and maintain that. So just overall lack of user-generated content can be a big problem. So, thin content, watch out for Google Panda. I know it's been, 7 years since Google released that algorithm, but it is now part of Google's core ranking algorithm. And according to HubSpot, 72% of online marketers describe content creation as their most effective SEO tactic. So a few things here before we get into the last section here for you folks is try to build content on category and product pages, dedicate or hire more resources to writing unique copy content, build out those product descriptions. Trust me, this is a huge win, and it's something that you're gonna definitely won't regret investing time and resources into. Optimize your page templates. Make sure that you've got enough copy on every single page for at least 100 words of unique copy, especially on product pages. Definitely try not to skimp out. Try not to avoid having valuable product descriptions. And lastly here, just encourage customer reviews and comments. Try to get your customers to help basically create content for you and keep your content fresh. So here's an example of Walmart. They've got, they favor design over text. So what they do is they add on their category pages, they add a ton of copy to the bottom of the page. So it doesn't affect the user experience, doesn't, shy the shopper away from clicking any of their products. All right, so now we'll go through just a couple case studies for you. So EliteSEM, actually, this is from a large-scale e-commerce website. Still working with these folks, and over time, we dug them out of a year-over-year kind of declining hole. And in 2017, we were able to improve their year-over-year results traffic-wise by 11%, transactions by almost 32%, and revenue by almost 50%. And we really just did this by focusing on fixing those site-wide technical issues and optimizing page templates. And over time, as Josue mentioned, SEO is a long-term approach. It's definitely that marathon. Over time, we got them there, and it was well worth it.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to highlight in our case study here, this is by LensDirect, and I think this is a smaller site that definitely had some of those content and SEO challenges that I think a lot of our listeners have at the moment. And, I know you breezed through the content bit, Joe, and I just wanted to say a little bit about that, is that, don't be intimidated by thinking like you need to have all of this content on all of these pages. There are definitely ways to make it easier and to have that process be efficient. One is with customer reviews. So the way LensDirect used Trustpilot for reviews is that they displayed reviews on some of their key landing pages or their key product pages. Now, LensDirect had already collected a ton of reviews living on Trustpilot.com, and what they did is they displayed the reviews using a trust box, which is essentially a widget in the form of schema markup, which is the thing I mentioned earlier. So that essentially communicates to Google, hey, this is this very high quality dynamic content constantly feeding Google by way of Lens Direct. And that led to this search page, SERP actually, on the phrase by contact lens, so completely non-branded. They were the second results, but they were the only one with these rich snippet stars. Again, only made possible via schema markup because of reviews. And they actually increased their search CTR by a full 45% because of that. And that really, in terms of effort, was very minimal, because the Trustbox widget, that's made to be done without actually using any developer resources. And then on the other side, in terms of kind of just creating content with a copywriter, I would say if you do have a copywriter, bring them in earlier than you might think you need them to. I'm speaking again from a content marketing perspective. If you work with them to build out these kind of templates and category page templates, they'll be able to then take that and just create content for each of those pages on a much scalable way than if you kind of said, hey, I have all these pages and I need you to write copy for them.
Great. So I'm going to skip past the key takeaways here just for the sake of time and really just get to the questions piece here.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And thanks everyone for your patience. I still see so many of you hanging on the line. So we'll commit to being wrapped up by 2 minutes after the hour and want to at least get our final poll question out and have a chance to answer at least one of your questions from the Q&A. I'll try and pick one that's fairly representative of what I can tell is the majority of people's curiosity or concern. So we'll launch the final poll question. This is just an opportunity for you to indicate if you're interested in hearing from either Trustpilot or EliteSEM to talk about SEO services from EliteSEM or digital marketing, or reviews and ratings from Trustpilot. So while you guys are getting your answers into that final question, I'll pick one of our questions from the Q&A that came in from Edward. And Edward was asking, how do you measure, of all of these strategies, how do you measure what is effective and how effective it is?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, from my experience at Elite with working with SEO clients, you want to make, first and foremost, you want to make sure you can use a platform that can gather all that information. So I'm sure most of you use Google Analytics, and that might, once you start to get millions of visits, let's say per month, maybe even per year, it might start to sample that data. So one thing you can do is kind of pair that information with results from Google Search Console and kind of connect the dots. It is very difficult in the SEO landscape to see what keywords are specifically driving traffic to your website. But to that point, to answer the question, I think looking at keyword rankings, knowing what keywords you should target per page, start tracking those. And then when you make a change, try to make sure you really see the value. You can see your rankings start to creep up over time and really see the impact that it's having. And keep an eye on indexation too. With duplicate content being a big issue with these types of large e-commerce websites, just because having more content indexed in Google isn't always a good thing. So keep an eye on that and see, we've got a quick win again is if you notice a lot of 404s popping up in your Search Console account, try to find those, try to redirect those, and you'll start to see the landing pages that you redirect to, you'll start to notice that traffic really going up.
Great. So we're going to wrap up. We're about a minute after the hour. If you have one more minute, you can just pop any questions you have left into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address them after the webinar. And as I mentioned, we will be sending out a recording and the slides for the webinar today. And finally, we'll share with you some additional resources from both Trustpilot and EliteSEM about some of the topics that Joe and Josue shared today. The first of which was the out-of-stock product pages, and second was answer engine optimization from Trustpilot. So with that, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We'll be sharing the recording with you shortly, and have a great rest of your week.